Over the past few months, I have dedicated my time on this channel to a project called Stats of the Wild, a series where I take a deep dive into the hidden stats and features behind Breath of the Wild's mechanics. And we've covered an array of interesting topics such as the hidden properties behind elemental weapons, the exact meaning behind the mysterious shield numbers and their surfing stats, and we've even covered the secret experience point system that this game uses to rank up all of its enemies and items amongst other things. The feedback on this series has been nothing short of exceptional, but I often get a lot of questions on these videos asking for further elaborations, or even requests to cover other smaller topics as well, that wouldn't really warrant their own full-length discussions. So in an attempt to answer all these questions, I thought that today we will go over 15 of the best miscellaneous questions that I've received, ranging anywhere from how bullet drop-off works for bows, to how things like metal crates affect damage output when used as a weapon, and anything in between that will help you guys improve your future knowledge on this game. With that said, let's get right into the questions. For the first, we'll start with the very highly requested one: what exactly triggers a blood moon? Unlike the popular belief that blood moons are based off how many enemies you kill, blood moons actually work completely off an internal timer system that starts ticking the moment after you encounter the last blood moon. As soon as 168 real-life minutes pass since the last one, the game will attempt to spawn one on the following night. This timer only ticks during live gameplay, and staying in menus or passing the time via campfire doesn't speed it up. But since blood moons only spawn when the player is in the main overworld, you could indefinitely delay this event from happening if you hide in a shrine when midnight hits, as the game will then always push it back to the following night. The next question asks about how often the Satori Mountain glows green, and if this event happens on a fixed schedule or not. And oddly enough, the scheduling of this event is tied to the current phase of the moon, specifically the night or day after the waxing crescent appears in the sky, which always happens the night after a new moon. The mountain will glow up at a random hour within this 24-hour cycle, and will last the entire day. But just make sure that you are not on or adjacent to the mountain while it's trying to glow, as this will prevent the event from happening entirely. The next question asks about the anti-one-shot mechanic that seems to be present in this game, which I can summarize for those of you unaware. Occasionally, when a really powerful enemy strikes the player down and you think you'll die instantly, you'll actually still manage to have just a quarter of a heart left, despite the math not lining up. Although this safety net mechanic is not explained anywhere within the game itself, as long as the player has a full set of hearts, they are 100% invulnerable to a one-hit KO from just about all enemy melee attacks, which explains why a lot of the really tough beasts will often take you down to just a quarter of a heart. However, this crutch goes away when you have anything less than full hearts, and it's completely absent on Master Mode, so even having full hearts won't save you there. Speaking of Master Mode, the fourth question asks about the exact stats behind enemy health regeneration, specifically about how much health can be regained and how fast. For just about all enemies, they will regen up to 30% of their max health 3 seconds after receiving a damaging blow, and this regens at a rate of 3% back every 1.5 seconds. This applies to just about all normal types of enemies, including things like Bokos and Guardians. But luckily, these rates are reduced a lot more for the Lynels, which thankfully prevents them from being far too OP. But moving on, our next question asks about the exact damage outputs of metallic objects when used as a weapon with magnesis or stasis. Although the exact damage will vary between how hard you swing, just about all objects have a maximum damage cap when swung at their max velocity. Small metal objects such as chests or planks have an average damage cap of 10, your medium objects such as metal crates, boulders, and even the metal doors have a damage cap of exactly 100, while the hard to find yet practical giant metal boxes don't even possess a damage cap at all, as they are allowed to one-shot even the toughest normal enemies, including the gold moblins with a hard enough swing. To avoid it from being too OP though, this doesn't seem to be the case for bosses and bigger enemies like Lynels, as I usually only get 1 to 200 per swing, with the max amount I've ever gotten being 500, but still a very powerful weapon otherwise. If you would like to use these OP boxes to your advantage, I'll leave a map with all the locations to them here, so maybe you can exploit this in your playthroughs. This next question is asking about the damage reduction you receive when attacking the thickly armored guardians, but this is actually a misconception in itself that I wanted to shine a light on. The only minuscule times where some form of damage reduction is present is when attacking the guardian's legs with weak weapons like the rusty ones, as it'll negate the damage completely. But attacking the legs with mid to high tier weapons or just hitting the main torso with anything doesn't present any damage reduction at all. It still is a viable tactic to go for the legs first though, as all ancient weaponry can snap them off with a single blow and deal 100 damage. Another misconception that seems to be widely popular is the damage bonus you get from using fire and ice attacks subsequently, as it's widely believed that shattering an ice enemy with fire does even more bonus damage. But in actuality, this bonus does not exist at all, as the only damage bonuses you'll receive are the base fire and ice bonuses from each attack, which we covered in our elemental stats video if you want to check that out after viewing this one. But another thing that we didn't cover in that video is the effect durations for things such as freeze and shock, and how this differs between normal and gold enemies. For normal enemies, the freezing effect will last for 30 seconds and the shock will last for 2, while for the gold enemies in specific, these durations are 90% shorter, with 3 seconds being the freeze duration and 0.3 seconds being the shock. One big misconception is that the gold enemies also take less damage from these elements, especially shock, which is completely untrue, as only the durations are affected. Next, this question is asking about how durability loss is calculated for weapons and bows in this game, since we previously covered shields in the past episodes. But unlike the complexity behind how shields take durability through blocking and surfing, the durability consumption for the weapons and bows is much more simple, as one use trims off 1 point of durability. For weapons in particular, there are certain surfaces that don't use up any durability though, such as the switches you'll see in shrines and cannons, and attacking a Lionel on the back. But beyond these exceptions, since the exact durability amounts are hidden for each weapon, I'll include a link to the spreadsheet that has them all listed for those of you interested. Now, this question asks about another hidden yet interesting stat about this game, which is the rusty weapon restoration achievable through Rock Octoroks. For those of you unaware, whenever a Rock Octorok sucks up a rusty weapon, it'll spit back a fully polished version, but this type can range anywhere from the cheap Travelers to the more expensive Royal version. And after doing a lot of testing, I was able to figure out the exact probability chances of getting the different tiers of gear. And as you can see, getting the high tier loot is kinda rare, but still is possible if this is something you want to try out. Just make sure to be careful while doing so. The next question refers to Master Cycle fuel loss, and how its fuel consumption works. The cycle will only lose fuel when the gas button is held down at a consistent rate, and things such as speed, jumps, or drifting don't have any noticeable effect on its consumption. On a full tank, the Master Cycle will be able to go for 6 minutes assuming the button is continuously held down. But when it does run out of fuel, there are a lot of different ways to fill it back up, with some being more efficient than others. Through my testing, it seems to be that all the weak materials listed here work the most effectively, as 10 of any of these items will be able to fill it to the max, while most other more expensive items will take way more. This was likely done to discourage the player from using more expensive items to fuel it, as that just would have been a waste of materials. Although there are a few expensive exceptions like fragments that work better for some reason, but it's best to just ignore those. The next comment covers a very Zelda-like question, referring to the Cuckoo storms you can create in this game, and how the stats behind activating them work. As we know, attacking a Cuckoo many times will cause a wave of them to bombard the player, but the exact amount of hits required to set this off is precisely 4, so the type of weapon you use and or damage buff is completely irrelevant. On a side note, Cuckoos in a storm will deal 2 damage apiece, and if you get an enemy to successfully perform that 4th hit, then the entire barrage will be directed straight at them, which is honestly pretty funny. But before we get into the last big questions of the video, I just want to say that I have a ton more of these stats related questions to cover. So if you would like to see a part 2 to this, definitely let me know in the comments. And feel free to drop a like on this one and subscribe with the bell on so you won't miss any future stats projects to come. But with that said, this comment asks for a very sought after section of information, which are the range differences across all different bows in this game, and which ones can shoot the farthest. And to most people's surprise, the majority of bows in this game have identical ranges, with their in-game range values set to 20, which is the approximate amount of in-game fire distance before gravity affects the arrow and drop occurs. The few exceptions to this are the Royal Guards bow, which has a range of 30, all Rito bows, scope bows, the duplex bow, and the ancient bow, which have ranges of 40, and finally, the 2 light bows, which have practically infinite ranges. Now, all this is really helpful, but what makes it strange is that the ancient bow seems to have a lot more range than just 40, given how this thing fires in almost perfectly straight lines. But that is because the arrows fired from this bow have an altered gravity stat that affects the way that they drop off. Unlike other arrows which have a gravity drop rate of 9.8 meters per second, which for the record is the same gravity measure as Earth, arrows from the ancient bow have a heavily reduced gravity rate of 2.8 meters per second, which explains why the drop rate is much less dramatic than the rest. But finally, while on the subject of bows, much like how some bows naturally have more range, some bows also naturally have better draw speeds. These include the Rito bows, the Forest Dweller bow, and the Royal Guards bow, and they all have between 30 and 80% faster draw speed. And better yet, this speed can stack with any quick draw modifier these bows might have, which can add 50 to 100% more draw speed at random to the base stats of the bow. This combo is super effective when attacking enemies with bullet time, as it'll allow you to unleash a huge volley of arrows into an enemy very quickly. But with all this said, that is all for the stats related questions to answer in this video. Thank you so much to everyone who has been providing feedback and asking questions thus far, as I'm looking forward to covering a lot more of these topics in the future. For those of you who don't know, I have a Patreon page where I've been posting a lot of the sneak peeks and teasing some of the stats info early before the videos come out, which is the least I can do for anyone who chooses to support me here, as it all helps out a great amount. So thank you so much to everyone who supports me there and through YouTube memberships, as it really means a lot. The links to these things will be down in the description below if you would like to help me out here as well. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.